He now prepared to speak, whereat their doubled ranks they bend, from wing to wing and half enclose him round. With all his peers' attention held them mute. Thrice Satan essayed, and thrice, in spite of scorn, tears such as angels wept burst forth at last. Words interwove with sighs found out their way. O myriads of immortal spirits, O powers matchless, but with the Almighty in that strife, was not inglorious, though the event was dire, as this place testifies, and this dire change, hateful to utter, but what power of mind, foreseeing or presaging from the depth of knowledge past or present, could have feared? How such united force of gods, how such as stood like these could ever know repulse? For who can yet believe, though after loss, that all these puissant legions whose exile hath emptied heaven shall fail to reascend, self-raised, and repossess their native seat? I am Phineas 12 Gauge, the darkest of Lord, the psychoneurotic psychopomp. It's this raising of Satan and his minions to reclaim his seat after the loss that expelled them from heaven that we come today to celebrate. Well, no, not really, not if you live in reality. If you live in reality, this is a cultural holdover from Samhain. And as important as it is for us to know the history of this darkest of days, it's more fun to know about some crazy shit that the evangelicals like to do about it. So, for some context, Samhain, or after multiple historical hijackings and reiterations, Halloween, was an old Celtic festival marking the beginning of the new year, which is now the day we recognize as November 1st. The reason for it starting on October 31st is because, similar to Judaism and full of other ancient cultures, the day ended when the sun went down. You know, when daytime ended. So, on Samhain, the Celts would all get together and put babies in a circle with tiny knives, and the last baby out of the death ring would not be turned into soup. No. To be honest, it wasn't really that exciting of a thing. It was the beginning of winter, and apparently it was also the season of lease renewals. They would bring in their flocks and light the hearths to stay warm, and they disguised themselves against ancient ghosts and evil spirits like you do. And to be fair, we still do that. Do you really think that your neighbor doesn't recognize you? No. It's to fool the hobgoblins and fairies, and these are the evil Irish fairies, not the fun Tinkerbell Disney fairies. There is also an aspect of the veil between realms being thinner, and so the druids could talk to the spirits, but it's in a very, I can really only find that on Wikipedia and some suspect-ass websites sort of way. What is listed in more reputable places is that they were big into doing divination on Samhain, because there's nothing like finding out if you are going to live or die on a day where you're also probably worrying that you don't store enough food for winter. There's absolutely no possibility or opportunity for the priest class to manipulate you into special treatment while they're kind of afraid they're going to die too. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that some of them bought their bullshit. But there's no way that someone didn't look at someone else and just go, "Hey, Killian, we're full of shit, right? Aye, O'Brien, we just be staring at the goat bones, talking about Miss Murphy's gonna live through the gout." The Irish and Scottish, the Britannia-style festivals carried on until the 1st century when the Celts were invaded by the Romans. At that time, the festival of Feralia was included in the celebrations. The rites during this time was an offering of gifts to the deceased, at the very least in the form of food, and a funeral anniversary feast was also had. Now, I can't find if they moved the festival of Parentalia from February to October, November, or if they just included the Feralia rituals that they would do on the last day of Parentalia in what was already going on. Either way, given the information that I have, it seems like this event may have been the introduction of the "we can fuck with the dead on Samhain" idea. There is a description of a ritual event taking place on Feralia from Ovid. 3 fingers tuck 3 incense lumps under a door, where a tiny mouse built a hidden path. The hag then fastens enchanted cords with dark lead, and rolls 7 beans inside her mouth. And she roasts on the fire the soon head of the sprat, smeared in pitch and spitted with a bronze rod. She also drops in wine, What remains of the wine she or her friends drink, although she drinks more. We have tied hostile tongues and our enemies' mouths, the hag shouts. Given the idea that the dead were up and roaming around the town, it's understandable that they would be fed, Roman ghosts like beans, you see, and bind them and send them on their way. So sources are a little mixed, and probably both are true. If my grandma were up roaming around, I fed her a nice meal and helped her get home, I'd have a party too. Especially if I believed, like the Romans did, that she could help me get in good with the gods. And double definitely if I believed, as the Romans did, that having grandma around would decay the everything around me, because it turns out being dead in the alive place isn't great. There's also the fact that there isn't really any information on what region these rituals came from. See, the Roman Empire in the 1st century was huge, and when your empire contains such disparate places as Britannia and sections of the Middle East, it's understandable that your rituals would get off date-wise. So it is possible that the introduction of Feralia was just an organic and cultural addition to the rituals in Britain. The Romans also introduced their goddess of the harvest and abundance, Pomona, to the celebrations. That's also not particularly surprising, given the fact that harvest happens in the fall, and between harvest and winter is a good time to get cuddled up to the goddess of abundance. Now, we're not really here for Feralia and Pomona. We should get along. In the 7th century, Pope Boniface, or Pope Gregory IV in the 9th century, established All Saints' Day. I found both, but the consensus seems to lean toward Pope Gregory IV around 837. For possibly political reasons, the sources are a little dodgy on this, but let's be real, it was political. I have played Crusader Kings. Everything is political. He moved it from May 13th to November 1st when the pagans started getting all uppity. It is the evening before that we celebrate as Halloween, and by the end of the Middle Ages, this had become the religious takeover that the Christians love to do and then be afraid of. There was some shifting around of the holiday, and it wasn't popular in North America until Irish immigrants came over in the 1800s, and with Geising being recorded first in Ontario, Canada, it became trick or treat and was mostly just trick. It was a whole thing with the Scottish and the Irish. Apparently we got a little shooty at pranksters before we started adding treats, and that's how Halloween was introduced to North America. Although on the East Coast, they are still pretty pranky on the 30th, and all this tricking and then treating, and primarily tricking, if we're being honest, allowed the holiday to become secular again. Although there are still religious aspects and panic. And if you think for a second we're not here for religious panic, welcome to the show. My name is Phineas. To begin the story of panics of the modern day Halloween, we must go back to a time before I was a grown-up. It was October 31st, the year was 1998. The writer was John D. Morrison, PhD. And the panic was in the fucking air, and it would set the tone for Christian nutter butters for decades. See, the satanic panic of the 80s was still fresh in everyone's mind, and was still going on in some parts of the world. We are warned in this piece that Halloween is Satan's high holiday, where you honor the saints, you understand. And we're told festivities are marked by unprecedented evil and blasphemy, with both sacrifices and hedonistic practices playing prominent parts. Now, I'm never one to turn away from hedonistic practices, and I do wonder what the blood sacrifice is of. Where's the blood come from? Makes a big difference to me. But that does beg the question of what exactly is this evil we must be aware of? Is it the horrible things dragging our children to the depths of hell? Is it them being drug into a world full of Satanism and the occult and evil by being drawn into some dark, haunted, creepy house? No, it's actually just it's costumes. Oh, we're told they're harmless. We're told that we are safe. And at that time, we were told we had to inspect our candy for razor blades and Tootsie Rolls and poisonous whatchamacallits. And it was a crazy time full of nonsense. Or was it? Because you see, Satan is the great deceiver and the ruler of this world and the adversary, and he will be crushed under God's heel and tortured forever. So on this, his most special of days, Satan's Christmas, if you will, So this is a short little article, but it's fun because at the end we're told not to let our children be taken in by these rituals. The ritual of wearing costumes and asking for candy, where statistically the biggest risk is from a stomachache from candy overdose. This is basically what my kids do on a daily basis, is they just dress in costumes and they ask me for candy. More recently, this is going to get a little upsetting. This is one of 2 times. It's going to get a little upsetting. There's something going on this year, and it echoes 2016. You see, there are a lot of witches, and for the record, unless something's changed in the last few years, witch is still a gender-neutral term, doing spells and bindings and sending love and good vibes so Trump shrinks under the weight of love and good vibes, which confuses me, but that is something I see quite a bit on the Twitters and from some of my pagan dorks on the Facebook. And on bibliatodo.com, they're concerned. Those people at bibliatodo.com, because this year, Satan's power is especially fierce. They are working to bring about the end days with their altars and their incense and their hand-painted tarot cards they got at the farmer's market on cardstock. Oh, yes. The witches are working mercilessly on this day of candy and costumes to overthrow our president. In the name of Satan, we shall rise up and vote. It's kind of laughable, really. And I'm not going to stay on politics long because I have other Jesus weirdos to get to, and this is kind of a nice break for me, actually. But I wanted to land on that for a minute because All Hallows Eve, the night before the day we pray for the saints, the night before the day we pray for everyone who hasn't gotten into heaven yet, All Souls Day, is an evil day, full of Bidenness, and that really paints the picture of who we're talking about here. These are people who don't just see the day as evil anymore. Oh, no. This determines which candidate is evil based on who the witches are doing magic for. Not like those good Christians who are at their most powerful on Christmas, who pray magic for the not Satan guy. So the whole thing is ridiculous. The witch fear goes from protect the children from the, if we're being real, protect the children from the hippies, all the way up to Satan is trying to overthrow the government by installing somebody who wants healthcare to be not as accessible as I might like, but more accessible than it is now. Now, I'm sure that the fact that Satan is in on this isn't great news to any of us. And I'm also sure that we would all want to know, as good Christians, if we were good Christians, what silly shit should we do instead, today, this most evil of days? Because, like Ray Comfort says, this is a day to turn the tables on the enemy. Buy my tracks for kids, and I get an erection every time I see someone in a banana costume. Actually, before I go on, and there's a link to this in the show notes, I was really surprised by something. It says when Ray Comfort got here in 1989, he was shocked at how many people took gospel tracts on Halloween. Now, that does surprise me a little bit because it was, post-Reagan America. Like, we were getting very religious right, as we covered in episodes 12A. And apparently he's never been self-aware because he didn't realize that people were really just taking them and then throwing them away and calling him an asshole later. But first he had to get over his fear of Halloween. And I reached out to atheist YouTuber Nervardia on this because she's from Australia, which is closer to New Zealand than I've ever been. Apparently, in that region, trick-or-treating hasn't really been a thing except for the last 10 or 15 years. And that really surprised me. But it still surprises me more that Ray describes this as a big culture shock. And I know that I'm probably just being America-centric, but that doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would cause a big culture shock. If the children were coming to the house saying trick or treat and then burning down the house and eating his foot, that would be a culture shock. But it seems that there would still be some of the same customs, right? When they sent people to Australia and New Zealand, they sent people with the same roots that they had when they went to Canada and started dressing in costumes and pulling pranks. Maybe with the exception that we might have been a little more shooty about it. And I'm not inclined to be fair to Ray, but to be fair to Ray, he does point out the fact that if there are trick-or-treaters, it's actually just normal to wear a mask during Halloween, and so wearing a mask, probably a thing that'll happen. and you need to be careful to follow local health ordinances. Now, the reason I give him a point for that, and it is a point, and it is lightly drawn, is because this is a guy who's released movies basically trying to get teenagers to kill themselves by praying away the gay and or not taking mental health medication. So it's a single lightly drawn point, but this does lead us to, like, what kind of things would Ray rather us do? And so I looked into that and I found some suggestions. Now, these alternatives that we're supposed to consider, fun enough, come from people who, much like Ray, are kind of a bunch of fucking assholes with some fucking asshole suggestions, so I think it's a good fit. The first fucking asshole suggestion is Kids Day USA. Instead of making light of fear and death and darkness, do the Christian thing and deny all of that entirely while yelling, USA, USA, and celebrate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Go door to door dressed as patriotic figures and collect candies and pennies to send to kids in Afghanistan. I didn't make that up. That's damn near a quote, except they make it seem like it's more of a normal occurrence. Do people give out pennies? Like, where in America does that still happen? I know that's an old cultural thing in some maybe more rural areas, but I have not actually heard of that happening in a while. Is that where my kid keeps getting pennies? Because he keeps trying to eat them. I might have to talk with 1 or 4 of my neighbors. So yeah, basically this idea is just take Halloween and turn it into the 4th of July Jesus edition. Which is fun, because it's you having a really weird reaction to the fact that my kids are dressed like Ben 10 and a ninja. But it's not as off base as the second suggestion, which is to turn it into Reformation Day and celebrate the Protestant Reformation. This one, I guess, is probably less stupid, though. The suggestion is you have a party at your church where you dress up as a famous Protestant, Luther, Calvin, Tetzel, those are the suggestions they give, or as your favorite Bible character. Really all you're doing is having a themed costume party at a church, and if that's what you want to do, go for it, and the Protestant Reformation fits. The 99 Theses were posted October 31st, 1517, and were a big point in setting off the Protestant Reformation. They kind of said the point. So the whole thing holds together a lot better, but the thing is, you're still a fucking asshole. This time it isn't because you're rubbing your Republican Jesus in our face. This time it's your kids. You're isolating your kids to protect your kids by insulating them into your little fucking cult. You're giving them an imaginary enemy and then using a time they could be out running around after dark, living out superhero fantasies with their friends to reinforce that. Because you're afraid you'll meet someone in a demon mask, or a devil hood, or God forbid someone dressed like death. Instead of realizing that, usually the scariest regular occurrence on Halloween is stupid white people culturally appropriating for a costume. But that is more preferable than our third suggestion, which is using haunted houses to give tours of hell because it's not traumatizing enough for your kids to be told about it to keep them in your cult. The quote here is, the stated idea behind these Christian alternatives to Halloween is to put the devil on center stage. In Hell House, for example, demons guide kids through scenes depicting the hell and destruction that Satan and this world can bestow on those who choose not to serve Jesus Christ. Kids are led through such stage traumas as an abortion, or a suicide, a school shooting, or death by AIDS. Then into a meeting in hell with the devil. I don't shy away from scary movies and camera filters and stuff with my kids, and my kids like it a lot more than I did at that age. And we've talked about some of these things because my kid has questions, so we've talked about abortion and what it is and how people make that choice and how me and my wife feel about it in our personal lives and our views going out to the world at large, because in our relationship we live by a set of rules that we don't expect other people to live by. So the difference is, I thought the monsters were real. My oldest kid knows that you can just look that kind of stuff up and see who plays what and who did what and who made it scary. She knows a little critical thinking, And she can understand that a non-viable fetus is not a person, and that people don't just decide to stop being pregnant anymore, and that's a big deal. And she understands death, and she understands depression, and she understands these things. The idea that instead of that, scaring the shit out of your children and then telling them that this torture and horribleness that they're walking through is what awaits them if they make the loving daddy in the sky angry, and painting all of that with more lies of an imaginary enemy is child abuse. And I'm really confused how we don't all see that. I still panic when I see red moons, because when I was 8, I was given all the biblical citations needed to demonstrate that a red moon means we're all about to die in Armageddon. And I learned that because my dad decided to not shut his fucking friend up on a camping trip when there was a forest fire, and the smoke between the earth and the moon caused the moon to look red. That traumatized me. I don't want to think about what would have happened if I had instead been given a guided tour of dying in a forest fire and then meeting Satan. But at least at the end of the haunted house, they get to go to heaven and meet Jesus. Honestly, I'm putting this here because it is a legitimate suggestion of things to do other than trick or fucking treat. And it should be addressed. But it is horrible, and it serves to demonstrate that Christians really are why we can't have nice things in this country and nice podcast episodes about things that scare them, and all I want to do is look at their stupid suggestions and laugh at them. But everything they do is terrible. Luckily, the last suggestion is something that we can kind of pull up out of that. They recommend that you just share the gospel. They tell their parishioners to educate people about the occult and why it's evil and harmful, and that might be more effective if they realize that most occultists are really just LARPers and pseudo-philosophers and people who like hanging out around just big old campfires. That's why I was into it. This would be more effective if they realized that the real evil spell the witches are casting is voting. This would be more effective if what they were telling people wasn't their bullshit misinformation metaphysical propaganda campaign, but just told them the real thing that makes these the least effective things they can do. It's fine. 3 of the 4 things on this list are more or less fine. And honestly, the issue that I have with the third one is that we're not talking about adults that can choose to go through and be scared and understand things about the real world. We're talking about adults who don't know shit about the real world, sending their kids through a torture maze to scare them into their cult and cement the brainwashing. That's the issue here. That's the real horrible thread that if you pull on, the whole thing comes unraveled, is that really it's fine. It's a little annoying, but you're just talking about having a social club, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the good news here, and this is good news, is that non-religion is still on the rise. These idiots that actually do these things are the minority. And it's not like any of us are gonna do much enjoying Halloween like we normally do much this year anyway. My kids are dressing up like Ben 10 and a ninja. They're going to go door to door. They're going to do it in my house, and they're going to loop around a few times, and they're going to get toys and candy, and it will be a good time, and that's how we will be celebrating Halloween this year. The horror movies are fun, and the trick-or-treating is taxing if you're a parent, but in the end, we should just be finding ways to have fun. Awareness of where it came from is great, and incorporating remembering our loved ones who have passed on the night when the veil is the thinnest is wonderful and poetic, even if it's not true. So let's do that. Let's just join the evil witches in putting love out there and cherishing people who have passed on and cherishing people who are here like it is true. Let's make believe and make magic. And then let's go do the real thing and vote, and we'll just get Trump out, and we'll use our love to shut down all the hell houses. This evil night of Halloween is a night we can use to make the world a better place. Because in the end, if you're not making the world a better place, why even be evil? Instead, you could be a Christian. I am Phineas 12 Gauge. This is the Apostate Seminary. The Twitters are @X Essential Panda and @ApostasyPowered. The email is poweredbyapostasy@gmail.com. The store is in the show notes. Take care. Stay safe. You are loved. Fight hate with evil and spread some around.